You think you know the person sleeping next to you. You think you hold all the cards, pulling the strings in a dynamic you carefully engineered to favor your own ego. Simon Reynolds certainly did. He thought his quiet, unassuming wife was just a lucky, ordinary woman he'd graciously elevated from mediocrity. He thought screaming at her in the middle of a crowded, high-end restaurant would simply put her back in her place. What Simon didn't know was that the woman quietly wiping tears from her eyes wasn't a nobody. She was the only daughter of the most feared, ruthless federal judge in the state, and Simon had just unknowingly signed his own professional and personal death warrant. Simon Reynolds was a man who lived for the mirror. As a newly minted junior partner at the prestigious Chicago corporate law firm of Harrison, Miller, and Croft, he believed he was the center of his own meticulously crafted universe. He wore $3,000 bespoke suits, drove a leased Porsche he could barely afford, and treated the people around him like stepping stones. Then there was Christina. Christina was a puzzle Simon thought he had solved long ago. When they met 3 years prior, Christina was volunteering at a legal aid clinic, wearing a simple cardigan and jeans, driving a battered 5-year-old Honda Civic. She was beautiful, but quiet, unassuming, gentle, and profoundly empathetic. Simon, who usually chased after the aggressively ambitious women in his social circle, found Christina's modesty intoxicating for all the wrong reasons. He didn't see a partner. He saw a spectacular accessory, someone he could mold, dominate, and keep waiting at home while he conquered the corporate world. What Simon never bothered to dig into was Christina's past. If he had, he would have noticed the discrepancies. He would have wondered how a woman making $30,000 a year at a non-profit had absolutely no student debt from her Ivy League education. He would have wondered why she never introduced him to her father, claiming only that they were estranged due to differing worldviews. Christina's maiden name was Bennett. She was the only child of the Honorable Nathaniel Bennett, a judge on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. Judge Bennett was a titan of the legal world, known by his terrifying moniker, the Iron Gavel. Christina had grown up in sprawling estates, attending galas with senators and Supreme Court justices, but Christina despised the sycophants and the gold diggers that her wealth attracted. She craved authenticity. She wanted to be loved for her heart, not her trust fund or her father's immense political capital. So, she buried her identity. When she married Simon, she thought his intense ambition was simply a drive to succeed. She believed his harsh words were just stress from a demanding job. But as the ink dried on their marriage certificate, the mask slipped. The real Simon was deeply insecure, masking it with cruelty. He began to belittle Christina's work at the legal aid clinic. "You're wasting your life handing out band-aids to losers," he would sneer over his morning espresso. He criticized her clothes, insisting she dress more like a partner's wife when she accompanied him to corporate events, essentially treating her like a doll he had purchased. The breaking point didn't happen in private. It happened under the warm, dim lights of Le Papillon, the most exclusive French restaurant in the city. Simon had spent weeks securing a reservation for 6. It was a dinner meant to impress Richard Croft, the senior managing partner of his firm, who held the keys to Simon's future promotions. Richard had brought his wife, Sylvia, and Simon had also invited another junior partner, a sharp, fiercely ambitious woman named Chloe Brentwood, whom Simon spent an inappropriate amount of time texting late at night. The dinner started smoothly, wine flowed, and Simon was in his element, holding court, laughing a little too loud at Richard's mediocre jokes. Christina sat quietly, picking at her sea bass, playing the role of the dutiful, pretty wife. The conversation inevitably shifted to a highly publicized corporate negligence case dominating the news. Richard Croft made a dismissive comment about the plaintiffs, calling them opportunistic vultures. Before she could stop herself, Christina spoke up. Her tone was respectful but firm. "Actually, Richard, if you look at the precedent set in Callahan v. Westcorp, The plaintiffs have a robust argument for willful negligence. The internal emails leaked to the press show the corporation knowingly bypassed safety protocols. It's not opportunism, it's accountability. The table went dead silent. Richard Croft raised an eyebrow, looking genuinely surprised and a little impressed by the precise citation of case law from a woman he assumed just ran charity bake sales. But Simon didn't see it that way. In Simon's mind, Christina had just contradicted his boss. In Simon's mind, his subordinate, quiet wife had stepped out of her designated lane and threatened his entire career. His face flushed crimson. The veins in his neck popped against his stiff white collar. He slammed his wine glass down on the table so hard the stem nearly snapped. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Simon hissed, his voice slicing through the elegant murmur of the restaurant. Christina froze, her eyes widening. "Simon, I don't care what you were just doing," he barked, leaning over the table, his voice rising in volume. Heads from neighboring tables began to turn. "Well, you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. You sit in your pathetic little non-profit office dealing with petty theft, and you think you can lecture Richard Croft on corporate litigation? You are embarrassing yourself, and worse, you are humiliating me." "Simon, please," Christina whispered, her cheeks burning with hot shame. She could feel the stares of the other patrons. She saw the shock on Sylvia Croft's face and the malicious, amused smirk playing on Chloe Brentwood's lips. "Don't Simon please me," he yelled, fully unhinged now. "You know nothing. You are nothing but a bleeding-heart naive girl who I gave a life to. Shut your mouth and let the adults talk." "Christina, God, you are so incredibly stupid sometimes." Silence descended over their table, thick and suffocating. Christina didn't argue. She didn't scream back. She simply lowered her head, a single tear slipping down her cheek, landing softly on her silk napkin. Simon, chest heaving, adjusted his tie and forced a tight, terrifying smile at his boss. "I apologize, Richard. She doesn't understand how the real world works." Richard cleared his throat, deeply uncomfortable. "Right. Well, let's look at the dessert menu." Christina sat there for the remaining 40 minutes of the dinner. But the woman sitting in that chair was no longer the forgiving, hopeful girl Simon had married. Something inside Christina, a deep, dormant inheritance of absolute steel, snapped into place. The car ride back to their downtown penthouse was suffocatingly tense. The leather seats of the Porsche felt like a cage. Simon gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, still riding the adrenaline of his own misplaced rage. "I cannot believe you pulled a stunt like that," Simon growled as he pulled into the underground parking garage. "Or do you have any idea how hard I work to build my reputation at this firm? You made me look like a weak man who can't even control his own household." Christina stared out the window at the concrete pillars flashing by. "I cited a public case, Simon. I didn't insult him." "You made him look stupid," Simon shouted, slamming the car into park. "And by extension, you made me look stupid. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? Because you have no ambition. You have no drive. You're content being a nobody." Christina finally turned to look at him in the dim, harsh light of the garage. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't see the handsome, driven man she thought she loved. She saw a pathetic, fragile bully. "You're right, Simon," Christina said softly, her voice completely devoid of emotion. It was a tone her father used right before handing down a maximum sentence. "I don't understand you at all." Simon scoffed, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Whatever, just stay out of my way tonight. I have actual important work to do." They rode the elevator up in silence. As soon as they entered the apartment, Simon headed straight for his study, slamming the door behind him. Christina stood alone in the dark kitchen. She didn't cry. The tears she had shed at the restaurant were the last she would ever waste on Simon Reynolds. She walked to the large floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. She had spent 3 years shrinking herself to make Simon feel big. She had hidden her brilliant legal mind, her powerful family, and her considerable wealth, all because she wanted a normal, pure love story. Instead, she had married a monster. Christina pulled her phone from her purse. She scrolled past Simon's contact, down to a number she hadn't dialed in nearly 4 years. The screen illuminated a single name. Dad. She pressed call. It rang twice. Christina. The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly, and instantly commanding. Even at midnight, Judge Nathaniel Bennett sounded like he was holding court. "Hi, Dad," Christina breathed, her voice cracking just slightly. There was a pause on the line. Nathaniel Bennett was a man who missed nothing. "Where is he, Christina?" "In his study." "Do you need me to send someone?" the judge asked, the protective fury of a father instantly rising beneath his calm exterior. "No," Christina replied, her spine straightening. "No, I'm perfectly safe. But you were right about him, Dad. You were right about all of it. I take no pleasure in being right about this, sweetheart. What do you need?" "I need my old life back," Christina said firmly. "I'm leaving him." "Good," Nathaniel said simply. "The guest wing at the estate is ready. The security gate will be open for you. Drive safe." "Thanks, Dad. See you soon." Christina hung up. She walked into the master bedroom and pulled a single medium-sized suitcase from the top of the closet. She didn't pack the expensive dresses Simon had bought her to look the part. She didn't pack the diamond necklace he had given her as an apology after a previous screaming match. She packed her jeans, her comfortable sweaters, her favorite books, and the few mementos she had brought into the marriage from her childhood. Everything Simon had provided, she left behind. Before walking out the door, Christina stepped into the kitchen. She slid the 2-carat diamond engagement ring and her platinum wedding band off her finger. She placed them carefully on the cold marble island. Beside the rings, she left a blank piece of paper. She didn't write a note. Simon didn't deserve her words. The empty page was a loud enough statement. There is nothing left to say. She walked out the front door, the heavy lock clicking shut behind her with an air of finality. The next morning, Simon woke up with a pounding headache from the wine. He rolled over, expecting to see Christina. The bed was empty. Annoyed, he threw off the covers and stomped out to the kitchen, ready to demand coffee and resume his lecture from the night before. Instead, he found the rings. He found the blank page, and he realized Christina's car was gone from the garage. Simon didn't panic. In fact, a cruel, arrogant smirk spread across his face. He poured himself a cup of leftover cold coffee. She'll be back, he thought to himself. Where is she going to go? Her non-profit salary can barely afford a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood. She'll crawl back in 3 days when she realizes how good she had it here. Feeling entirely unbothered, Simon picked up his phone. He didn't call his wife. Instead, he opened his messages and texted Chloe Brentwood. Simon. Wife packed her bags and threw a tantrum. Place to myself for the weekend. Drinks at my place tonight. Chloe. I thought she'd never leave. See you at 8. Bring the good scotch. Simon tossed his phone onto the counter, laughing out loud. He felt invincible. He had successfully pushed out his nagging, embarrassing wife, and he was about to celebrate with a woman who actually matched his ambition. He thought his life was finally perfect. He had absolutely no idea that a storm was gathering just 20 miles away in a heavily guarded, sprawling stone mansion in Lake Forest. A storm named Nathaniel Bennett, who was currently watching his daughter cry over a cup of tea, quietly vowing to destroy the man who put those tears there. For the first 4 weeks, Simon Reynolds lived in a state of absolute, intoxicating delusion. He believed he had flawlessly executed the hardest maneuver in a man's life, shedding a useless wife without paying a dime in consequence. The morning after Christina left, Simon had indeed hosted Chloe Brentwood. Over expensive scotch and takeout sushi, He painted a picture of himself as the long-suffering husband, finally breaking free from an ungrateful, emotionally unstable anchor. Chloe, whose ambition was only matched by her lack of a moral compass, happily played the role of his sophisticated new confidant. Within a week, she had practically moved her designer wardrobe into the space Christina's simple sweaters used to occupy. At the firm of Harrison, Miller, and Croft, Simon was flying high. Richard Croft had been so thoroughly impressed by Simon's take charge attitude at the restaurant, conveniently ignoring the horrific public abuse, that he decided Simon was ready for the big leagues. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Richard called Simon into his sprawling corner office. "Simon, have a seat," Richard said, sliding a massive, red-tagged file across his mahogany desk. "I have something that's going to make or break your path to senior partner." Simon sat up straight, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I'm ready, Richard." "This is the Sutton Pharmaceuticals defense," Richard announced, his tone dropping an octave. "Arthur Sutton is a personal friend. His company is being sued by a coalition of environmental non-profits and a class action group from a small town in Ohio. They're claiming Sutton's manufacturing plant leaked a chemical byproduct into the local water table, causing widespread illness." Simon flipped open the file. The damages sought were astronomical, over $400 million. "Who is representing the plaintiffs?" "A ragtag group of public defenders and bleeding heart legal clinics," Richard scoffed. "They have passion, but they don't have our war chest. I want you to lead the defense team. Bury them in paperwork, Simon. File endless motions, drag out the discovery phase until they run out of funding and are forced to accept a nuisance settlement." "Can you handle it?" Simon smiled, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Consider it done. I know exactly how these legal aid types operate. They're emotional and weak. I'll crush them." While Simon was busy planning his ascent to the top of the Chicago legal elite, 30 miles north in the affluent suburb of Lake Forest, Christina was reclaiming the pieces of her soul. The Bennett estate was a sprawling, ivy-covered stone mansion sitting on 10 acres of manicured land, hidden behind heavy wrought-iron gates. For 3 years, Christina had avoided it, wanting to prove she could make it on her own without the shadow of her family's immense wealth and power. Now she realized that true power wasn't something to hide. It was a tool to protect oneself from monsters. She sat in her father's expansive library, the walls lined with centuries of legal history. Judge Nathaniel Bennett sat across from her, in a high-backed leather wing chair, swirling a glass of neat bourbon. He was a formidable man with silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and a reputation for handing down judgments so airtight they were studied in law schools. "He hasn't called once," Christina said softly, staring into the fireplace. "It's been a month. He just let me walk away." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "Men like Simon Reynolds do not value people, Christina. They value utility. The moment you ceased to be useful to his ego, you ceased to exist. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I want a divorce," Christina replied, her voice steadying, "and I want it done cleanly. I don't want his money. I don't want his penthouse. I just want out." Nathaniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Christina, you're a Bennett. You do not just get out when a man publicly humiliates you and treats you like dirt. Do you want me to make a few phone calls? One word to the partners at his firm, and he will be reviewing traffic tickets in a strip mall in Peoria." Christina smiled faintly at her father's protective instinct. "No, Dad. If you ruin him, he'll play the victim. He'll tell everyone that the big, bad judge crushed his career unfairly. I want him to ruin himself. I want him to see exactly what he threw away. And I want him to realize he did it all on his own." Nathaniel sat back, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. "That's my girl. Who are you hiring for the divorce?" "Beatrice Gallagher," Christina said. Nathaniel chuckled, raising his glass. "God have mercy on his soul." Beatrice Gallagher was the most terrifying family law attorney in the Midwest. She didn't take cases, she took scalps. Her retainer alone was more than Simon's annual salary. And when Christina walked into a sleek, glass-walled office in downtown Chicago, Beatrice was already waiting. "Christina Bennett," Beatrice said warmly, standing up to embrace her. She had known Christina since she was a teenager. "Your father gave me the heads up. I've already pulled the financial records on your husband, or soon-to-be ex-husband." Christina sat down, crossing her legs. She was no longer wearing the cheap cardigans. She wore a perfectly tailored dark navy blazer, expensive slacks, and her grandmother's pearl earrings. "I want to serve him, Beatrice, but I want to do it in person, at a mediation." Beatrice arched an elegant eyebrow. "You don't want to just send a process server to his office and embarrass him?" "Oh, he's going to be embarrassed," Christina said, her eyes flashing with a cold light that mirrored her father's. "But I want to see his face when he reads the financial disclosure." Simon was having lunch with Chloe at a trendy bistro near the courthouse when his phone buzzed. It was an email from a law firm he recognized instantly. Gallagher and Hayes. Simon frowned, putting down his fork. "What is this?" Chloe leaned over, peering at his screen. "Gallagher and Hayes. That's the top family law firm in the city. Sylvia Croft used them for her first divorce. Why are they emailing you?" Simon opened the attachment. It was a formal summons for a divorce mediation, citing irreconcilable differences. The petitioner was listed as Christina Reynolds. Simon burst out laughing, drawing stares from nearby tables. She actually did it. She filed. But look who she claims is representing her. Beatrice Gallagher. Chloe frowned, looking confused. "How could your wife afford Beatrice Gallagher? Her hourly rate is $1,000. "She can't," Simon smirked, waving his hand dismissively. "Christina is probably working pro bono through some legal aid connection, or she took out a massive loan she'll never be able to pay back. She's trying to scare me into giving her the apartment and alimony. It's a classic bluff." "What are you going to do?" Chloe asked. "I'm going to call Todd Jenkins," Simon said, naming a cheap, loud-mouthed lawyer known for bullying unrepresented spouses in low-stakes divorces. "We'll go to this little mediation, call her bluff, and I'll walk away paying her nothing but a bus ticket back to whatever cheap apartment she's renting." 2 weeks later, Simon and Todd Jenkins strutted into the gleaming lobby of Gallagher and Hayes. Simon wore his best Tom Ford suit, eager to project power and wealth. Todd, a sweaty man with a poorly fitted collar, carried a battered briefcase. A paralegal escorted them into a massive conference room overlooking Lake Michigan. Simon sat down, leaning back in his chair with an arrogant grin. "Let's make this quick, Todd. Offer her $5,000 to cover her moving expenses, provided she waives all alimony." "You got it, Simon," Todd chuckled. "She's probably going to walk in here crying." The heavy glass door opened. Simon's mocking smile froze on his face. The woman who walked into the room was not the mousy, quiet girl he had yelled at in the French restaurant. Christina looked like an entirely different species of human. She wore a stunning, impeccably tailored, cream-colored Dior suit. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, was blown out in sleek, rich waves. On her wrist sat a Patek Philippe watch that Simon recognized instantly. It was worth more than his Porsche. She radiated a quiet, terrifying aura of absolute authority. Right behind her walked Beatrice Gallagher, holding a single slender folder. Simon swallowed hard. He felt a sudden, inexplicable drop in his stomach. "Christina," he managed to say, his voice lacking its usual thunder. Christina didn't even look at him. She took her seat directly across from him, placing a leather-bound notebook on the table. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just waited. Beatrice sat down and opened the folder. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Let's skip the pleasantries. We are here to finalize the dissolution of marriage between my client, Christina Josephine Bennett, and Simon Reynolds." Todd Jenkins cleared his throat, leaning forward aggressively. "Now listen here, Beatrice. My client is the sole breadwinner. We know Christina works at a non-profit. If she thinks she's getting the penthouse or long-term alimony, she's out of her mind. We are prepared to offer a one-time payment of $5,000, and she walks away clean." Beatrice didn't react to Todd's bluster. She slowly turned a page in her folder. She looked up, making eye contact with Simon, not his lawyer. "Mr. Reynolds," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with venomous, polite professionalism, "my client is not asking for your penthouse. The lease is under your name, and frankly, she has no interest in living in a mortgaged shoebox. Furthermore, my client is officially waiving all rights to alimony, spousal support, and any claim to your retirement accounts." Simon blinked, completely thrown off guard. He looked at Todd, who looked equally confused. "She is?" Simon asked, unable to hide his relief. He had won. He had actually won. "Well then, if she's waiving everything, why are we here with high-priced lawyers?" "Because, Mr. Reynolds," Beatrice continued, sliding a thick document across the polished oak table toward him, "Illinois law requires full financial disclosure from both parties during a divorce proceeding, regardless of the settlement terms. This is my client's sworn financial affidavit. I suggest you read it." Simon hesitated. He reached out and pulled the document toward him. He flipped open the cover page. He scrolled down to the section labeled Assets and Net Worth. Simon's eyes locked onto the number at the bottom of the page. He blinked. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. Total estimated net worth, $48,500,000. The air rushed out of Simon's lungs as if he had been punched in the chest. His vision blurred at the edges. This is a typo," he stammered, his hand suddenly trembling. $48 million? That's impossible. You make 30 grand a year." "I make 30,000 a year at the clinic, yes," Christina finally spoke. Her voice was calm, melodic, and devastatingly cold. "The rest is my trust fund, my inheritance from my late mother's estate, and my personal investment portfolio." Todd Jenkins leaned over, staring at the number. His jaw practically hit the table. He slowly leaned back, realizing he was entirely out of his depth. Simon stared at his wife. "Who are you?" he whispered, his arrogant facade crumbling into dust. "My name is Christina Bennett," she said evenly. "Bennett," Simon muttered. The name rattled around in his brain. It was a prominent name in Chicago, but he had never connected it to his quiet, unassuming wife. "My client has generously decided not to pursue a claim against the marital assets you accrued during the marriage," Beatrice said sharply, snapping Simon's attention back to her. "She wants a clean break. Sign the waiver, Mr. Reynolds. Accept that you are walking away with exactly what you brought into this marriage, which, comparatively speaking, is absolutely nothing." Simon felt a wave of nausea wash over him. For 3 years he had treated this woman like a peasant. He had berated her for buying generic brand groceries to save money. He had belittled her career. He had thought he was the king of the castle, the provider, the master of their destiny, all while she had more money in checking accounts than he would earn in his entire lifetime. Humiliation, hot and burning, flushed his face. He grabbed the pen with a shaking hand and signed the waiver. He didn't read the rest of the document. He just wanted to get out of that room. As Simon stood up, practically throwing the pen down, Christina spoke one last time. "Oh, Simon?" He stopped at the door, refusing to turn around. "Good luck with the Sutton Pharmaceuticals case," Christina said smoothly. "I hear the discovery phase is going to be brutal." Simon froze. How did she know about the Sutton case? It was strictly confidential, assigned to him just days ago, but his bruised ego wouldn't let him ask. He shoved the glass door open and practically ran for the elevator, leaving his cheap lawyer scrambling behind him. He had survived the divorce. He had kept his job, his penthouse, and his new girlfriend. He convinced himself on the elevator ride down that money didn't matter. He was a rising star at a top law firm. He would make his own millions. What Simon didn't know was that the divorce was merely the prologue. The real execution was waiting for him in federal court. Simon Reynolds believed he was winning. In the 6 weeks following the mediation, his life had become a whirlwind of high-stakes litigation and high-priced distractions. He had fully integrated Chloe Brentwood into his life, replacing Christina's quiet presence with Chloe's sharp tongue and expensive tastes. But the cracks were starting to show in his professional armor. The Sutton Pharmaceuticals case was becoming a gargantuan beast. The plaintiffs, represented by a relentless, scrappy lawyer named Sarah Jenkins, were refusing to be intimidated. They had filed a massive motion to compel discovery, demanding internal memos that Simon knew would prove the company had ignored safety warnings about their chemical runoff. "Just bury them, Simon," Richard Croft had told him during their weekly briefing. "I don't care if you have to dump 1,000,000 pages of redacted documents on their desk. Make it impossible for them to find the needle in the haystack." Simon was doing exactly that. He was working 18-hour days, fueled by espresso and his own burgeoning ego. He felt a twisted sense of pride in his ruthlessness. Every time he successfully blocked a motion or delayed a hearing, he felt he was proving Christina wrong. He was the adult in the room. He was the one who understood how the real world worked. However, a strange thing happened on a Thursday afternoon. Simon received a notification from the clerk of the court. The presiding judge on the Sutton case, an elderly man named Judge Miller, had suddenly recused himself due to a minor health issue. The case was being reassigned. Simon scanned the notification. Case numbers 24, CV 8821, Sutton Pharmaceuticals versus Ohio class action. Reassigned to the Honorable Nathaniel Bennett, 7th Circuit. Simon frowned, tapping his pen against his desk. "Bennett," he muttered. "Why does that name sound so familiar?" He shrugged it off. He had been so focused on the divorce that he hadn't spent much time researching the local judiciary beyond the usual suspects. He assumed Bennett was just another old-guard judge who could be charmed by a well-tailored suit and a prestigious firm's letterhead. That night, at his penthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Chloe was complaining about the lack of attention. "You're always at the office, Simon," Chloe said, swirling a glass of wine. "If I wanted to live with a ghost, I would have stayed in my own apartment." "I'm leading a $400 million defense, Chloe," Simon snapped, his patience wearing thin. "This is what it takes to be a partner. Christina never complained about the hours." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Chloe's eyes flashed with ice. "Then maybe you should have stayed with the little charity worker," Chloe hissed. "Don't ever compare me to her again." Simon apologized, but the seed of doubt was planted. He realized, with a sudden, jarring pang, that Chloe didn't love him. She loved the version of him that was a partner at Harrison, Miller, and Croft. She loved the power. Christina had loved him, or at least the man she thought he was. He pushed the thought away. "Regret is for the weak," he told himself. "I'm about to win the biggest case of my career." The morning of the motion hearing arrived with a cold, biting wind whipping off Lake Michigan, whistling through the canyons of Chicago's Loop. Simon Reynolds stood in the marble-clad lobby of the Everett McKinley Dirksen United States Courthouse, checking his reflection in the polished brass of the elevator doors. He looked every bit the part of a high-stakes corporate defender. His suit was charcoal grey, his shirt a crisp, blinding white, and his tie, a deep, authoritative burgundy, was knotted with surgical precision. In his mind, this was his arena. The Sutton Pharmaceuticals case was a beast, but he believed he was the tamer. He had spent the previous night with Chloe, laughing over expensive martinis about how easily they would paper over the plaintiffs. He felt invincible. The recent recusal of Judge Miller was a minor speed bump, Simon was confident that whoever the new judge was, they would be just as susceptible to the prestige of Harrison, Miller, and Croft as any other. As he walked into courtroom 2201, the atmosphere changed. Federal courtrooms always had a certain gravity, but this room felt different, heavier, colder. The dark wood paneling seemed to absorb the light, and the silence was absolute. Simon took his place at the defense table, laying out his monogrammed leather folder and his gold-plated pen. Beside him, his junior associate, Peter Gable, was visibly sweating, his hands trembling as he organized the thick binders of discovery objections. "Relax, Peter," Simon whispered, his voice smooth and condescending. "It's a procedural motion. We're here to say no, and we're going to say it with enough Latin and precedent that the judge will be bored into agreement by lunch." Simon adjusted his cuffs and took a casual glance towards the gallery. Usually these hearings were empty, attended only by a few law students or bored journalists. But today, a single figure sat in the very last row, near the heavy exit doors. His heart skipped a beat, then began to thrum with a slow, rhythmic dread. It was Christina. She wasn't the woman he remembered from their apartment. The Christina he knew wore soft cardigans and smelled like vanilla and old books. The woman sitting in the gallery wore a structured, charcoal-grey power suit that fit her with terrifying precision. Her hair was swept back into a sharp, professional chignon, and her face, usually so expressive and gentle, was a mask of unreadable granite. She wasn't looking at him with anger. She was looking through him, as if he were a minor clerical error she was waiting to see corrected. "What is she doing here?" Simon hissed under his breath. "Who, sir?" Peter asked, looking up from his binders. "My ex-wife," Simon muttered, his eyes narrowing. "She's here to psych me out. She must have tracked the docket. It's pathetic, really. A desperate attempt to see me in my element." But as he looked at her, he realized she wasn't alone. Sitting next to her, though keeping a respectful distance, was a man in a dark suit who looked less like a friend and more like a security detail. Before he could process this, the side door to the bench swung open. "All rise!" the bailiff's voice boomed, cutting through the silence like a gunshot. The room stood in a synchronized rustle of fabric. Simon stood tall, a practiced, respectful half-smile on his face, ready to greet the new arbiter of his fate. A man stepped out from the chambers. He was tall, his movements deliberate and commanding. He wore his black judicial robes not as a uniform, but as a mantle of absolute authority. His hair was a thick shock of silver, and his face was etched with the lines of a man who had spent decades staring down the worst of humanity. As the judge took his seat behind the high mahogany bench, Simon's smile didn't just fade, it vanished. His blood turned to ice, and a cold sweat broke out across the back of his neck. The judge had the exact same piercing ice-blue eyes as Christina. He had the same sharp, aristocratic tilt to his jaw. The resemblance wasn't just familial, it was identical. "The Honourable Nathaniel Bennett presiding," the bailiff announced. Bennett! The name finally hit Simon like a physical blow to the solar plexus. The iron gavel, the most feared judge on the Seventh Circuit, the man whose opinions were so airtight they were practically holy scripture in the legal world. Simon's mind raced back to every dinner he'd had with Christina. "My father and I have differing world views," she had said. "He's a very traditional man when it comes to the law." Simon had assumed her father was some small-town clerk or a retired librarian. He had never once, not in his wildest, most arrogant dreams, imagined that the woman he had called stupid and nothing was the only child of the man who now held his entire career in the palm of a calloused hand. "Be seated," Judge Bennett said. His voice was a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards. Simon sat, but his legs felt like water. He looked at the back of the courtroom. Christina was watching him. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply sat there, a silent witness to the collision of Simon's ego and the reality he had ignored. We are here for the motion to compel discovery in Sutton Pharmaceuticals v. Ohio class action, the judge began, his eyes scanning the room. When they landed on Simon, they didn't linger. There was no flicker of recognition, no paternal rage. There was only a terrifying, professional indifference. "Mr. Reynolds, I believe you are lead counsel for the defense?" Simon forced himself to stand. His throat felt like it was filled with dry sand. "Yes. Yes, Your Honor. Simon Reynolds, for the defense." "Mr. Reynolds," Judge Bennett said, leaning forward, resting his chin on a tented hand, "I've spent the morning reviewing your firm's objections to the plaintiff's request for the 2022 internal safety audit. You've cited attorney-client privilege and work product doctrine in over 400 separate instances. That is a bold strategy." "Thank you, Your Honor," Simon managed, trying to regain his footing. "We believe the integrity of the defense depends on the confidentiality of—" "I didn't say it was a good strategy, Mr. Reynolds," the judge interrupted, his voice turning sharp as a scalpel. "I said it was bold. In fact, it's so bold it borders on the delusional." This audit was conducted by an independent engineering firm nearly 2 years before this litigation was even a glimmer in a plaintiff's eye. Pray tell, how does a technical safety report, shared with 3 different subcontractors and the Sutton Marketing Department, suddenly become a privileged communication between a lawyer and his client? "Well, Your Honor," Simon stammered, his mind whirling, "the audit was commissioned with the anticipation of potential future litigation. Therefore—" "Anticipation?" Bennett's eyebrow arched, a movement that seemed to carry the weight of a death sentence. "Mr. Reynolds, if every corporation could hide their negligence under the guise of anticipation, there would be no discovery in the American legal system. You are not just pushing the envelope, you are trying to rewrite the mail code." The judge turned his gaze to Sarah Jenkins, the plaintiff's attorney. "Miss Jenkins, I've read your motion. It's well argued. But I want to hear from Mr. Reynolds one more time. Simon, can you cite one single case, just one, where a pre-litigation safety audit was held as privileged after being disseminated to non-legal departments?" Simon's mouth opened and closed. He looked down at his binders. He looked at Peter, who was staring at the table as if trying to disappear into the wood grain. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. He could feel Christina's gaze on the back of his head. He could feel the eyes of every clerk and bailiff. I would need to consult my notes, Your Honor," Simon whispered. "Don't bother," Bennett snapped, and for the first time a hint of steel-edged anger bled into his voice. "The case doesn't exist. You are obstructing discovery. You are wasting the court's time with frivolous objections, and frankly, you are insulting the intelligence of this bench." The judge picked up a document from his desk. "I am granting the plaintiff's motion in its entirety. You will produce the unredacted 2022 safety audit by 5 p.m. today." But we aren't stopping there. Given the creative nature of your firm's filing system, I am hereby ordering a full forensic audit of the defense's discovery process. A court-appointed special master will be entering Harrison, Miller, and Croft tomorrow morning to ensure no other privileged documents have been conveniently misplaced. Simon felt the room tilt. A forensic audit. It was the nuclear option. It meant the court would see everything, every internal memo, every email where Simon and Richard Croft had discussed burying the evidence. It was a career killer. "Your Honor, please," Simon gasped, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "A forensic audit it's unprecedented for a firm of our stature." "Then perhaps a firm of your stature should act with the ethics it claims to possess," Bennett said, his gavel hovering in the air. "In this courtroom, Mr. Reynolds, we value integrity over arrogance. We value the truth over the shark tactics you seem so fond of. I suggest you spend the afternoon reflecting on that. Court is adjourned." Thwack! The sound of the gavel hitting the sound block echoed through the room like a final heartbeat. The judge stood and exited through the side door without looking back. Simon stood frozen at the table. He was vaguely aware of Sarah Jenkins packing her bags, offering him a look of pity that felt like a slap. He was aware of Peter Gable scurrying out of the room, likely to call the firm and warn them of the coming storm. Finally, Simon turned. The gallery was empty, save for Christina. She was standing in the aisle, waiting. He walked toward her, his legs heavy, his mind a chaotic blur of fear and confusion. He stopped a few feet away from her. "Christina," he whispered, the name sounding foreign in his own mouth. "Why? Why didn't you tell me?" Christina looked at him. In the dim light of the courtroom, she looked like a statue of justice itself, beautiful, unyielding, and utterly indifferent to his suffering. "Tell you what, Simon," she asked, her voice calm and clear, "that my father was a judge? Would it have mattered? If I were the daughter of a janitor or a teacher, would that have made it okay for you to scream at me in a restaurant? Would it have made it okay for you to treat me like a piece of furniture for 3 years? I didn't mean those things," Simon lied, his voice cracking. "I was stressed. The firm didn't make you a bully, Simon. It just gave you an audience," Christina said. She stepped closer, and for a moment the old Christina flickered in her eyes, the one who had loved him. Then it was gone, replaced by a cold, hard light. "You only respect power. You only value people who can do something for you. You thought I was nothing, so you treated me like nothing. You thought my father was a nobody, so you walked into his courtroom thinking you could lie to him." "Christina, please," Simon pleaded, reaching out a hand. "Talk to him. Tell him I'm a good man. Tell him—" Christina stepped back, avoiding his touch as if it were toxic. "He's much more lenient than I would have been, Simon," she said softly. "He still believes in the system. I've seen what men like you do to the system. You should be grateful he's the one on the bench and not me." She turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors. "Christina!" he called out, his voice echoing in the empty room. She stopped, her hand on the brass handle. She didn't turn around. "You were right about one thing, Simon," she said, her voice carrying over her shoulder. "You do know how the real world works. And in the real world, actions have consequences. Welcome to yours." She pushed the door open and vanished into the bright light of the hallway, leaving Simon Reynolds alone in the silence of the courtroom, standing in the shadow of a bench he had never truly respected, facing a future he had finally and completely destroyed. The walk from the federal courthouse back to the glass and steel monolith of Harrison, Miller, and Croft felt like a slow-motion march to a guillotine. The Chicago wind, usually a bracing companion to Simon's ambition, now felt like it was trying to strip the very skin from his bones. His phone, nestled in the pocket of his $3,000 suit, was vibrating with such frequency it felt like a panicked heartbeat. He didn't need to look at the screen to know what was happening. The legal world was a small, gossipy village, and the news of a junior partner being eviscerated by the iron gavel himself was likely trending on every legal blog and group chat in the city. But it wasn't just the professional failure that was suffocating him. It was the image of Christina's eyes. For 3 years, he had seen those eyes filled with warmth, then worry, and finally, a quiet, enduring sadness. Today they had been as cold and impenetrable as the marble pillars of the court. When Simon stepped through the heavy glass doors of the firm, the usual atmospheric hum, the frantic clicking of heels, the low murmur of high-stakes negotiations, died instantly. The receptionist, a woman Simon had frequently ignored or snapped at, didn't look up. The associates in the bullpen, usually desperate for a nod of his approval, suddenly found their computer screens intensely fascinating. It was a heavy, judgmental silence that echoed louder than any shout. He bypassed his own office, his legs feeling like they were made of lead, and went straight to Richard Croft's corner suite. He didn't knock. He couldn't afford the courtesy of waiting. Richard Croft was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, hands clasped tightly behind his back, silhouetted against the grey Chicago skyline. On his polished mahogany desk sat a printed copy of the forensic audit order, the ink still fresh, looking like a death warrant. "Richard, I can explain," Simon started, his voice thin and reedy. "The judge, he's biased. He's Christina's father, Simon," Richard interrupted. He didn't turn around. His voice was surprisingly quiet, a low, dangerous vibration that was far more terrifying than his usual aggressive roar. "I know. I received a call from a very old friend of mine on the circuit court 10 minutes ago. Apparently the entire legal community is talking about the man who was stupid enough to berate the daughter of Nathaniel Bennett in a public restaurant and then walk into his courtroom with blood on his hands." "I didn't know!" Simon shouted, the desperation finally breaking through his facade. "She lied to me. She kept her identity from me for 3 years. How was I supposed to—" Richard finally turned around. His face wasn't red with anger. It was a mask of cold, clinical disgust. "She didn't lie, Simon. She just didn't brag. There's a profound difference that a man of your limited character clearly cannot grasp. You didn't need to know who her father was to treat her with basic human decency. That's the tragedy of people like you, Simon. You only respect the boot that's currently on your neck." Richard stepped towards the desk, pointing a trembling finger at the audit order. "Because of your personal vendetta and your absolute lack of professional ethics, you've invited a federal forensic audit into this firm. Do you have any idea what they're going to find in the Sutton files? The internal memos we missed, the discovery timelines we manipulated, things I told you to handle?" Simon's heart hammered against his ribs. "I was just doing what you asked, Richard. I was being the shark you wanted." "No," Richard snapped, his eyes flashing with ice. "You were supposed to be smart. Instead, you were arrogant. You've compromised the firm's integrity. You've lost us our most lucrative client. And you've made us a target for the Department of Justice. Security is waiting at your desk, Simon. Your things are already in boxes." "You're firing me?" Simon gasped, the reality finally hitting him. "I'm a partner. I have a stake in—" "You're a liability," Richard said, turning back to the window, dismissing him as if he were a broken piece of office equipment. "And don't bother looking for a job at any firm with more than 2 rooms. Your reputation is radioactive. You're done in this city." Simon stumbled out of the office, his vision blurring. At his desk, 2 burly security guards stood like sentinels, watching him as he picked up a single cardboard box. It contained his Rising Star awards, a designer pen set, and a few framed photos of him shaking hands with politicians. He noticed there wasn't a single photo of Christina. Chloe Brentwood was standing near the elevators, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Chloe," Simon said, a surge of pathetic hope rising in his chest. "We can get through this. I have savings. I have connections. We can move, start over in another state." Chloe didn't even let him finish. She looked at the cardboard box, then at his sweating, pale face, with a look of pure, unadulterated calculation. "Simon, I'm a senior associate with a clear path to partner. A path I've worked too hard for to let you ruin. Do you really think I'm going to tether my career to a man who just got blacklisted by the 7th Circuit? We're done. Don't call me. In fact, don't even look in my direction." She turned and walked away, the sharp, rhythmic click of her heels echoing through the lobby with the same finality as the slamming of a vault door. 6 months later, the world had moved on, leaving Simon Reynolds behind in the dust. The iron gavel had been thorough. The forensic audit had led to several sanctions against Harrison, Miller, and Croft. And Simon had been the convenient sacrificial lamb. His law license was under review, and his bank account, once padded with bonuses, had been drained by legal fees and the cost of maintaining a lifestyle he no longer had. He was living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood he used to mock for its lack of character. His Porsche had been repossessed months ago. He now took the bus, sitting among the very people he used to call nobodies. He spent his days as a freelance document reviewer, earning a pittance to stare at endless pages of digital text in a darkened room, a ghost in the machine of the legal world. One afternoon, Simon sat on a park bench, eating a flavorless sandwich. He picked up a discarded copy of the Chicago Law Bulletin from the seat next to him. The front-page headline hit him with the force of a physical blow. Christina Bennett appointed as chair of State Task Force on Corporate Accountability. There was a photograph of her. She was standing on the steps of the Capitol, flanked by her father and the governor. She looked powerful, radiant, and vibrantly alive. She wasn't wearing the designer labels he had forced on her. She was wearing a simple, elegant suit that screamed of substance over style. The article detailed how she had used her vast personal inheritance to fund a massive legal advocacy group, turning her bleeding heart into a precision instrument that was now dismantling the very types of corporate greed Simon had once spent his life protecting. Simon let the paper slip from his fingers, watching it flutter into the dirt. He realized then, with a sickening, hollow clarity, that Christina hadn't just been the judge's daughter. She had been the smartest, strongest person he had ever known, and he had been too small, too blinded by his own ego, to see it. He had yelled at his wife, thinking she was a footnote in his grand story. He had spent years trying to keep her in the shadows, never realizing that he was the one standing in the light she provided. Now the light was gone, and Simon Reynolds was exactly what he had always feared being, a man of no consequence, forgotten, silent, and utterly alone. Some people think that power is found in the loudest voice or the most expensive suit. But as Simon Reynolds learned the hard way, true power lies in integrity, and you never truly know the strength of the person standing quietly beside you. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and the ultimate hidden identity reveal, make sure to hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that respect is earned, not demanded. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the dramas that define real life. What would you have done if you were in Christina's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.